All right, are we ready? Wonderful. I'm going to call this workshop together for the Housing and Redevelopment Authority Levy Program update. We'll go around and do introductions, and then I will pass it over to Carrie Collins to kick us off. So I'm Commissioner Frebham, Ramsey County Commissioner, District 1. Let's go to Commissioner Reinhardt.
Victoria Reinhardt, Ramsey County Commissioner, District 7.
Jim McDonough, District 6.
Trisha Matas-Castillo, District 3.
Martha Faust, Community and Economic Development.
Carrie Collins, Community and Economic Development.
Joanna Berg, Deputy County Manager.
Ryan O'Connor, County Manager.
Tony Carter, District 4 Commissioner. Not sure where I am today.
You're in your spot now, you're in your grid. Mary Jo McGuire, Commissioner, District 2.
And we can go to Mi Chang and go around the rest.
Mi Chang Chikwa. Simone Hubbard, Communications Associate for Community and Economic Development.
Max Soldier, Community and Mr. Matt.
Community and Economic Development.
Marcia Jackson,
Accountant, CED.
The bachelor's or procedure.
Great, and we will, there's a lot of info in here, not the biggest PowerPoint we've seen, but not the smallest. So 4 years ago. Never gonna let that down. We're gonna start with, we'll have a couple of opportunities for questions. So if we can just get through the content, we'll have a stopping place after we get through the development incentives. So hold your questions, and then we'll have an opportunity to ask, and then we'll go through some more material. Opportunity for questions and discussion. All right, Carrie.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners. I'm just going to walk you through the agenda for today. Our intent is to roll out the extent of new programs associated with our critical corridor suite of programming, to also walk through adjustments we've made to existing programs that have become kind of beneficial as a result of this newly established HRA levy, to talk about other department-related updates, and then to answer any questions at the end here. The next slide. I love this slide because it shows the tremendous amount of growth that CED has had in the last 4 years, and we continue to grow. We've got 2 additional FTEs, and then we will be at 12 FTEs and 2 interns to make 14, which will be our full complement. So you can see the extent of growth went less than 4 years ago. There was 4 of us when we started, and so it's been just a pleasure and wonderful to see all of these new hires on board. Next slide. This slide is intended to kind of ground us in why we're doing the programming that you're about to see momentarily here. These are the 8 strategies that are found in our economic inclusion plan. And we kind of put this as kind of a pillar slide within all of our presentations because, as we know, boards may change, city councils may change, and we always want to demonstrate why. Why are we doing this? Why are we targeting specific audiences? And to ensure that there are opportunities for the community and public officials to kind of reground ourselves in our mission and seeing through the strategies within our plan. So you'll hear quite a few programs that align directly with several of the strategies, but these are kind of the 8 strategies that frame not just our departmental budget, but programs and the funding that we deliver. Right, Martha Faust on critical corridors.
Great. Thank you so much. It's great to have the opportunity to talk with you today about critical corridors. So Carrie introed the graphic from the plan, and I'm going to be speaking specifically about our new critical corridors programs, which align with the strategies that are highlighted here. And they provide another strong connection to the county's affordable housing goals through investments in planning and development projects. And the programs I'm going to walk you through are helping implement these highlighted actions from the ECI plan, as well as building on CED's previous work to develop an equitable development framework that can be used to evaluate development proposals through an equity lens. And lastly, before I get into the programs, just wanted to mention that programs were developed in consultation with community development and city partners over the past year, and their feedback has been helpful and will continue to shape these programs going forward. So first up is the Critical Corridors Pre-Development Planning Program, which you may recall we had a pilot program in 2019, Critical Corridor Revitalization Program. And we have had since then several community projects that have been underway, including Reconnect Rondo, the Bryce Larpenter Alliance initiative, some of their work, and then a project along the County Road E corridor. So this is kind of allowing this program to be more sustainable on an annual basis, and will fund planning for public improvements and or redevelopment around major transportation and commercial corridors. And you can see the list of selection and strategic priorities. So again, the opportunity to encourage planning for future housing development, intensification of land use, emphasizing pedestrian environment and transit service, improving pedestrian engagement environment, safety and access, and actions that are likely to catalyze surrounding development without displacement of current residents, which is so important. Then the second and kind of largest funding area is in development and infrastructure, the Critical Corridors Program, and this funds inclusive redevelopment and public infrastructure within. Here you can see the selection and strategic priorities, again, providing an important complementary tool with our housing programs for increasing affordable housing units with a priority on 30% AMI, but as well as helping us build a sustainable economy through place-based investments that will help produce jobs, increasing property taxes. We also look at things like project feasibility and readiness, the ability for projects to act as a catalyst for surrounding redevelopment without displacement, which is always an important consideration, as well as improving pedestrian environment and access, bike access, and transit access. And then the last bucket of funds is the Commercial Corridor Initiative. This is an important complementary tool for helping us strengthen and revitalize the small business economy in suburban Ramsey County. And you can see selection and strategic priorities here, including actions to improve conditions for job creation and BIPOC entrepreneurship, creating small business incubators, as well as actions to improve coordination among businesses, et cetera. Again, as a suite of programs, we think this is going to be a really important complement. And we will be holding a webinar tentatively next Wednesday for our community partners. They've been with us along the way. We previewed this back in July, but to give them all of the program details. And Ella Mitchell, who was introduced earlier as part of our team, has been specifically hired to help us be able. And then I just wanted to mention briefly, this is the Critical Corridors will be another important complement to the Environmental Response Fund, which, as you know, has been around for 20 years and has been an important source of funds for that pre-development environmental assessment and remediation. And we are planning to do a solicitation this fall for a program that we're calling Earth Plus, which would be administered by a third party and would be small grants on a rolling basis, and along with the technical for emerging developers, which Max is going to tell you about shortly, will be another resource for emerging and nonprofit developers, and we think it will have be another benefit in terms of assisting affordable housing projects in the very early stages.
I'll just piggyback to say, what we talk about internally is kind of, unintended. All roads lead to housing. And this Critical Corridor program plural, is intended to ready corridors for higher density, ready corridors for greater cleanup, for greater infrastructure involvement, so that we can get to the densities, particularly in suburban Ramsey County, that we would like to see to increase supply. And so that's what these programs are intending to do. So as we build out the criteria in terms of awarding the funds for these programs, it will be vetted against our equitable development framework so that we are starting to see those densities that really make a difference versus the kind of 2 to 3 story mid-rise that we typically.
Yeah, just a couple questions before we jump on. As we're talking about these critical corridors, because you list pedestrian safety and transit, I assume Public Works is in part of this and identifying which corridors we're gonna focus on. And then the other part on the IRF funds in particular, you know, that's been a kind of standard pot of money that comes from the feds. And as I'm thinking about our, future legislative agenda, as we're starting to start that process too, are there enough funds there? Or is that something that we should be advocating for to complement this critical corridor?
May I take that? So, Commissioner Matascasio, the IRF is actually funded through the Mortgage Registry and Deed Tax, so
Okay.
it's coming from county funds,
Oh,
and it's funded by 1/100th of every property transaction in the county. So that has been, as property transactions increase and property values go up, that funding source increases slightly. It has been hovering at about $1 million a year.
okay.
It does tend to be oversubscribed. So, I mean, it continues to be an important source of early funding for projects.
Thanks for that. I didn't realize that was. Appreciate that.
We'll take 2 100.
Great.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'm gonna go back to slide 7, on the bullet point, act as a catalyst for surrounding redevelopment without displacement of current residents. I think we need to be maybe a little stronger and a little bit more clear because, you know, all these are really intended to increase density. You know, we want to increase the affordable housing component, especially at 30%, we're calling that out. But, you know, just the way this is stated basically is just preserving who's their current residents and not necessarily ensuring that these infrastructure developments actually have a shared benefit to the greater community, which means, you know, it grows for definitely mixed income, mixed use. But these are long-term things we have to pay attention to because that gentrification occurs over time. You know, people are afraid of it and it's real and we know, seeing it all over, but it doesn't happen like 2 months after, you know, the Green Line opens, right? You know, it's 10 years, you look back and you go, oh, what happened here? We didn't want this to happen, and, you know, we were really cognizant about it. We did a lot of things, you know, the year 1, year 2, year 3, but, you know, we moved on and market took over, and before you know it, it's changed. So this piece here is really important, not only for the current residents, but ensuring you know, everybody benefits from this public infrastructure investment. But this is a long-term piece. That's like the long-term piece of these infrastructure investments. That's the tail that's there for a long time. Because without people paying attention, watching, demanding it, I can remember Sue Haig talking when she was my council chair on the Green Line. There's so much affordable housing by default, you know, rental, duplexes, triplexes, single-family homes. A lot of them in disrepair or not necessarily up to the quality we'd like to see them. We're focused in on the new stuff, but we're not paying attention to that. That switches over. That's what switches over. And all of a sudden, they turn it into market rate, single-family, market rate duplex, and you're not even paying attention to what happens there. I just want to make sure we're calling that out, recognizing that, you know, that's a responsibility long-term for us to make sure we're watching that, but then also having some strategies that go above and beyond, say, necessarily the big investments for the 30% AMI, but how to preserve what's there in a quality way that meets those needs.
I'm sure, Commissioner, I think that's an excellent point, and I'd like to, you know, one step further is also not displacing supportive land uses or supportive services that may be associated with individuals that live in a neighborhood. You know, whether that be, you know, a thrift store, I think of the southwest corner of Rice Urban Road, for example. That serves a very intentional purpose to those neighborhood or grocery, and just paying attention to what is redevelopment doing in terms of the existing land uses, and is that land use, like the Race Street Garden, providing a huge amenity to quality of life of the individual?
Yeah, no, that's really important. I think, I'm sorry, Madam Chair, I think, you know, as a whole, people, when you start thinking about mixed income, people get that kind of concept. But the mixed use concept doesn't really necessarily always pull in that. A lot of that commercial or support within the community needs to support the whole continuum. It's not, we're just gonna take anything that wants to come in. The next thing's a boutique, you know, that's doing, you know, X, Y, Z, you know, whatever, that just has no value to the people that are living there, so that's a really good point. Thank you.
Can I ask a question? Like, have we identified the critical corridors, or is that?
Yeah, Madam Chair, we have, there is a map that's been created, and we've sought input from our city and community development partners. And that'll be published very soon on a website. So it's basically any kind of, transit corridors, obviously, are part of that mix, but then we asked our city partners to kind of identify what are the key corridors, especially in suburban Ramsey County, where they don't necessarily they're not all currently served by transit, but where are important, priorities within their comp plans, redevelopment areas, places where, you know, connecting folks from place to place. And so we've kind of taken an all-in approach in terms of that map is very inclusive right now. But we have, you know, kind of tiered by, job centers, you know, housing, major institutions and so on. So, we'll be using that as a resource.
So could some of these investments potentially bring transit by investing and increasing the density and pedestrian aspect? It would make it more likely that we get transit, not limiting it to those that already have it. Commissioner Mass, good to see you, and then.
Just to follow on to this question, how many corridors are we talking about?
If you can think it, it's on there.
Oh, I know.
It's
Yeah.
really inclusive. Yeah, and I think to Martha's point, we did hear a lot of feedback from suburban city partners to say, you know, well, that means we're out, and we're not going to be able to compete. And we said, no, you know, this is an inclusive corridor program that if you have a, you know, mixed land use corridor, you know, that needs to be readied for greater density, then that falls within the spectrum of mobility. Or an aging commercial strip that is in need of reimagination, that falls within it so that we can ready a corridor for future transit.
Yeah. And that just, I mean, along those lines, because I was wondering as I was listening to this, if our Arcade Street's on that, MnDOT's actually making a major investment from 7th Street to Roselawn. People don't realize, but Arcade Street's a state highway. I mean, it's fully developed in Urban Core. They all think it's a city street, but it's, or even a county road, but it's a state highway. And they really are making a major urban investment there. And so is that corridor on your list? I know it's in the city and not in the suburbs, but there's some big changes coming there. Thank you.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thank you so much, and it's very exciting to see all of this. Just curious, I know you know this, but just to clarify for me, who are you working with in our cities? So like when we talk to our elected officials, do they know about this? Or is it just mainly the staff that we're talking to? We just have run into, as we all know, you know, we run into these situations where staff is gung-ho and not our fault necessarily, but they're not necessarily sharing it with their mayor and council, and so I'm just curious.
Universal around this table.
Universal around, yeah, right.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah.
Commissioner McGuire. We have, you know, through the walk around earlier, to talk about, we, really kind of prefaced and outlined the range of uses that we intend to use the age rate levy. And we talked very specifically about critical corridors. And so I don't think this will be a surprise to anyone. In fact, this is in direct feedback to many of the councils that we heard from to say, you know, we're a small community, and if we don't have a major affordable housing project this year or the next, how can we benefit from the levy? And this is really, you know, took that feedback into consideration. So in terms of input from our city partners, we did that at various economic development summits.
If I could add,
Yeah.
Commissioner McGuire, for any of these grants, we require a resolution of support from the
Okay,
state.
great.
So, you know, in some cases, they're not gonna be able to have that at the time of application, but in order to receive funds. So that's a way of making sure that we're, yeah, exactly.
Right, thank you, I really appreciate that. I mean, I think we all want that to happen, and I think sometimes we assume it's happening, and it's not always.
Ryan and
Thanks, Madam Chair. I was just gonna add on the broader dynamic, I mean, that goes way beyond this workshop. I think
Exactly.
you're kind of damned if you do or if you don't.
I
If you
know.
start to go around staff to talk to their
I know.
council, that's a problem. And if you don't do it, it can be a problem.
Yeah.
I think the general direction we're gonna try and keep taking is make sure the board is aware of our movement forwards, that you can talk to your peers. And we're gonna work with staff, and they need to be communicating up the chain of their organizations. And, depending upon where you work, that's more or less functional sometimes, right? But
Yeah.
I don't know how else to really do that, and we'll keep trying to set that expectation consistently across all areas, but, I think that's the smartest way for us to go, otherwise we fall into real weird dynamics.
Madam Chair, I really appreciate that, and we all know about this incident with the Environmental Resource Center, and, you know, I just sent a letter to my city manager in Roseville, and I said, hey, Pat, I hear your staff is working with ours, just want to make sure the council knows, or did you want me to talk to them? He's like, no, I'm letting the council know, you know, and he goes, but thanks for the heads up, so, I think I can, you know, we can help in some ways like that, but I didn't really want to go to the mayor and the council, you know, without talking to our city manager anyway, at least. So I think they think they had that covered anyway, but sometimes they think they have it covered and it may not be, and that's not our fault. But I think whatever we can do to help with that, so, thank you.
So my question, has been touched on here, was about prioritizing, because while we have many critical corridors, and it's helpful to know that communities have to register in and, you know, find support from staff and from other governing bodies, we don't have unlimited funds. So it is helpful to have some criteria that we can lean to when we have competitive or competition for more funds than we can put out there, and that also can help inform other governing bodies and communities as to what we're looking for and what we think can best strengthen in all of these areas. So I'm assuming that there will be a list of that sort of criteria that we can latch on to and share.
Just curious, because, there's also corridors of opportunity, and so are these an overlap of those? Are they different? Is there some correlation?
Different.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's pretty Commissioner Mattis, I think that's pretty limited set. I mean, this is
Okay.
really Ramsey County.
Okay.
On that point,
But there's funding opportunities
Yeah.
in there, so are we maximizing, are we looking where there's opportunity or overlap? Do we have like overlays to see where there's some double
maximum.
maximization happening?
Great feedback, and we can certainly look
Okay.
at that. Yeah.
Good
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
That's the kind of criteria.
Yeah.
Mhm.
If there are no other questions, we can move to the next section.
Madam Chair, if I could just say, some of those corridors of commerce, is that what we're calling it, corridors of commerce? Ours are critical, but what is the legislature's corridors
Corridors
of
of
commerce and opportunity? Don't always follow what the we all know this, but I'm just saying it out loud. They don't always follow what the departments think, you know, those are pretty political corridors, so they follow legislative. So just as we're coordinating with that, we want to be talking to our legislators too, because they're the ones pushing some of those corridors. So I think, much to the chagrin of the department, I think. But anyway, just, I'm seconding Commissioner Mattis-Castillo, you know, just heads up, and I think we all, you know, just want to be aware of that.
Right, Max and Portia on housing, yep.
Chair, Commissioners, thanks for having us here today. We're excited to talk about an evaluation and proposed recommendations for our first home down payment assistance. So Portia Jackson and I will be tag teaming this one, and we'll be kind of switching off every other slide or so. And this has been a legacy program that we've had for many, many years. we've never really been able to sit down and evaluate it. So over the course of the last year, we sit down and now we can show you how many loans we have, how much we've invested in this, and who has received those loans. And so that allows us to then propose recommendations to you on how we might want to tweak that program. First I'll hand it off to Portia to give an overview of our existing program. Oh, yeah. Forgot a slide. This shows where it fits in within our economic competitiveness and inclusion plan, and so it directly correlates to both the existing program and any proposed recommendations to expanding the affordable home ownership opportunities strategy.
All right, so our current program, and this is an overview of what that is the Ramsey County First Home Down Payment Assistance Program. It essentially helps first-time home buyers who are low to moderate income, so under 80% AMI, to purchase homes in Ramsey County, excluding the city of St. Paul, due to the fact that we use home funds for this particular program, so we can't work with St. Paul. So, for example, 80% AMI right now, a household of four, that income is about $89,400. What this provides is up to $15,000 in assistance for down payment and closing costs, and eligible properties include single-family homes, condos, townhouses, and land trust properties. Again, I just stated that it's funded by HOME, which is a program under HUD, and we decided to evaluate the program from 2021 to 2022 due to low utilization. We've only had 2 loans closed since I started in July 2021.
And so, kind of, where did this idea to need to evaluate, not only for the low utilization, but knowing that it was as part of the ECI plan and the engagement around that, as well as the HRA levy rollout, so both the residents, nonprofits, and our city partners, that really started in earnest in 2020 and 2021. And then we spoke about this kind of more in a brainstorming mode in our last board workshop, which was in 2020. We then did down payment assistance specific engagement with residents, lenders, and nonprofits. So Portia's been really handling that in terms of residents, whether those are folks who are on an existing coalition like the Black Commission that's associated with the state of Minnesota, lenders like Sunrise Bank, First Independence Bank, and a variety of other lending partners like Bell Bank and Bridgewater as well. And then our nonprofit network in this housing ecosystem, whether that is NeighborWorks, Dayton's Bluff Neighborhood Council, a variety of other nonprofits as well. And so we've been doing that over the winter and spring, and we kind of always on a rolling basis. We're always checking in, and we hear from them quite frequently. And on the resident side, we hear people reach out every single day because they're interested in this, but the parameters just don't fit where they're at. And so that's where we hear a lot of other feedback. And then we have evaluated our existing program outcomes. So with the addition of the planning specialist within CD, Peufua, we've been able to actually dig into the data here. And then what is our current housing market? We're kind of in the crazy period where 2021 was really high costs and low interest rates. And now we still have high costs and high interest rates. And so how do people navigate this market? And so then we've continued our engagement with city partners this summer. And here we are at this county board workshop in August 2022. And after we kind of review these and tweak these program recommendations, we're hoping for a kickoff in September.
All right, so this is where some of the things we've evaluated, what we've seen so far in our program that we currently have. We've written about 252 loans since 2000. We still have about 116 active loans, so that means people are still in their house. They haven't refinanced or cash out, and they haven't sold. And we spent about $411 million on this program since 2000. As you can see from the chart.
Is it 4 million or 411 million?
No, it's 4 million. Did I say 411?
You said 411. It sounded like a lot of money on. I was like, wow. Newspaper story tomorrow, Portia.
Right. No, $4.11 million. Yes, thank you for correcting that.
All right.
So.
That's that whole.
Never mind, this program is great for home buyers. No, change anything. No. So, we did see a huge peak, during the economic downturn, even though lending was tight, prices were low, so we were able to write 22 loans during that time. And as you can see, over time, it's been peaks and valleys for different reasons, but as I stated, I started in July 2021, and I wrote 1 loan in 2021 and 1 loan in 2022. So we had to evaluate, what has happened and what is going on now. We also learned that 62% of our first home DPA recipients were white. So about 156 families. 27% were Black or African American. But the population of suburban Ramsey County is only 7% Black African American. So, we did serve 27% of this money went towards, those households, and then 7% went towards Asian households, and 9% of suburban Ramsey County is Asian. So, we have been serving folks. We do wanna, I mean, as you know, that has not, you know, bridged the gap. Like, we still have this huge gap, because Ramsey County unfortunately has the worst in the state. Minnesota is like number 2, and then we're number 1 of the worst when it comes to disparities in homeownership between Black and white homeowners. So that's the makeup of what we've done over the last 22 years. All right, so another thing we looked at were the current market conditions. And then we took a snapshot from April 2021 to March 2022 of some of the cities. There are 2 cities that are not included because they are outliers, and that would be Gem Lake and North Oaks. So we did not include them. Cause this was,
Share their average home price, just.
I think like,
Entertainment value.
where that was like $800 and something thousand, so that was twice right there.
They don't qualify.
Yeah, so I was like, I don't think many of our folks will be buying in North Oaks. But, so for the home funds are our current program, and the maximum purchase price per home is $273,000. And as you can see, only 1 city in suburban Ramsey County is under that average, and that's Lauderdale, and the rest of them are above. So we just, again, the reason why we couldn't write loans is because people couldn't find houses under the maximum purchase price, which was $273,000. All right, so what have we learned? Less inventory for first-time home buyers because there are higher home sales prices. Increase in mortgage interest rates, and flexibility in home funding. So one of the biggest things is when you close, you can only have $5,000 in liquid assets under home. I don't know, you know, if your water heater goes out, what happens? You don't have any money. Yeah. The housing and debt-to-income ratios are, you know, the minimum is 30% of your gross income is what you can spend. We don't want people to have to necessarily have a minimum. I mean, we do want a minimum, but not at 30%. I think 30% probably became the norm before I was born, and then people just kept doing it, and there is no really rhyme or reason about it. They just kept saying 30%, so everything's 30%. So we wanted to look at those things. Sales price, again, as you saw, 1 city has average ownership of 273, so we had to do something about that. And then the income limits, if houses in the area that we serve are more expensive than what people can buy, so if you can't buy the 80%, what's the point of having the program? And we also had a need for increased marketing engagement, particularly in communities of color, you know, getting out to those nonprofits and lending institutions that have a large population of BIPOC customers and clients so that they know that this is here. I would just tell you, I used to be a housing advisor, so I used to work for a nonprofit certified housing council agency. Had no idea Ramsey County had down payment assistance, and it's been going on for a few decades now. So marketing is needed. And also, we want to have greater flexibility for first-generation home buyers and multi-generational households. So now I will tell you what our proposed changes are.
So I'll walk us through this one. We have a variety of criteria on the left-hand column that are kind of the key indicators of all the different kind of down payment assistance programs across the metro and the state. And we're comparing our first home existing program to our proposed program on the right side. So the title remains the same. It gets uncapitalized because it's no longer going to be home HUD funding. So just want to point that out as kind of the funding source shift here. And the funding source would really shift from home to HRA levy. HRA levy would detach us from all those crazy HUD requirements of this. This has already been kind of set the stage in our May 17th, 2022 board action regarding the HRA levy and the usage for this year in the wealth creation category. So our target audience on the existing is first-time homebuyers. On the proposed, it kind of splits into 2 branches. You can still serve those first-time homebuyers in kind of a more traditional model with HRA funding, but as well as expanding eligibility to include first-generation homebuyers, which would set the stage up for more generational wealth creation there. In the geography, Overall, the geography would remain the same as suburban Ramsey County. For first-generation homebuyers, as we have increased investments in home ownership opportunities and owner-occupied units within the, and our down payment assistance could be used within those specific properties. And we'll talk some more about those collaborations coming up. Thinking about the feedback we heard here in this room last time we were here talking about this program, and should it open up to the whole county or not, we just feel like we're waiting for the city of St. Paul to kind of set the stage with their new inheritance fund, and as well as kind of restocking their existing homebuyers assistance before we see how it needs to kind of align across the city of St. Paul as well. On AMI levels, for first-time homebuyers, it would remain 80% AMI. And first-generation homebuyers, for the vast majority of them, it would remain 80% AMI as well. But we do know that there's larger households that have not been able to access purchasing a home, and they might have a grandma who's on Social Security or another relative who will be living with them. And so for large household sizes, that AMI could increase to 100% AMI. And that would match some of those higher home prices that we see as well. The purchase price would align with Minnesota Housing's purchase price. And so they set a purchase price every year. And this year it is $372,000 within the greater Twin Cities area. So many more homes are opened up from that. So
Can I just say something about that? So we captured how many homes were available at different price points. So right now, at $273,000, which was the limit before with home, there are about 76 active listings that are available in suburban Ramsey County. With the 372,600, there's about 177. So it's 100 more homes available to people just by us increasing the purchase price that we will allow with our program.
Real quick question. This is additive? We would still have the first home and receive the home funds, and then with the expansion to levy? No?
This is all levy, and we will no longer be
Hmm.
using home funds. We will even be using it for multifamily projects.
Oh,
So home could be reallocated within an annual
We're gonna
action
use it where it
plan.
works better.
okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
So we
Thank
can
you.
send home over to multifamily development in the annual action plan.
Yeah,
And use HRA as a more flexible source for a program like this.
okay. And then we don't have to manage the two. That makes sense.
Back up, Portia, you know, the one outlier, in terms of the, and you saw the article about the phenomenon happening in Lauderdale with real estate companies kind of swooping up many opportunities or supply that would be great for first-time home buyers. Chatted, you know, quite a bit with their city administrator to say, how can we work together to kind of break this phenomenon from happening? And it's also kind of a purchase price, just being right at that point there. So we're in conversations about that, but I think this program will also really help.
I just wanted to add to that. I had a great conversation with the mayor of Lauderdale, who is, you know, they're even trying to get residents to hold on a little longer until we can get this into place, because they really want to encourage marketing to especially Black families in Lauderdale and to figure out what the partnership looks like. So that's really encouraging to have a community that's so eager to do that work.
And as we go down this list, the loan amount on the first-time home buyer would increase from $15,000 to $20,000. We found that kind of $15,000 wasn't an incentive to kind of jump through all the hoops needed here. And then this is kind of an interesting and progressive take on the first-generation piece, up to 25% of purchase price. So if you're thinking about a home that is $372,000, that could be up to $93,000 in down payment assistance. With the goal, if we match that down on that last roll with principal, interest, tax, and insurance, or the PITI monthly payment, we're trying to get people at 25% of their income as their monthly payment. So it'd kind of be balancing between that 25% of purchase price and getting them down to 25% of their PITI, so that they don't enter into homeownership as cost burdened.
And I'll say something about cost burden is you got this information. Less than 10, or about half of the homeowners in suburban Ramsey County pay less than 10% of their income towards their housing payment. On the flip side, half of the renters in suburban Ramsey County pay more than 30% of their income towards rent. So that's why we wanted to change and try to get people at 25 so they can get the benefit of paying less of their income towards their housing costs.
And then just the last two lines on this slide are loan terms. So for first-time homebuyers, that would remain a 0% interest due upon sale. So if you sell your house or refinance, you would pay back the first home, and then that gets recycled into this program, like it would with home funds. On first-generation homebuyers, it would be 0% interest and then forgivable after 20 years, which is kind of balancing this is a big investment into your family and your wealth creation, but it also preserves that affordable stock for a long period of time as well. You're incentivized to stay in that stock. And then the liquid asset amount. So we discussed the $5,000 limit for home funding through HUD. We think that a kind of best practice is up to 6 months of liquid assets. So 6 months of your PITI in case of emergency, in case you have an emergency repair or something happens with your employment shortly after entering into home. To allow for that flexibility.
Oh, we've got one more slide. Can we get to that slide and then go back to questions?
It seemed like we were taking questions.
We can, yeah, we can.
Trying not to, and people kept sneaking in.
I can wait.
Okay.
So just 3 more bullet points here. Something we've thought about too is we found that many of the people who had participated in First Home were not connected to our other programs, rehab and specifically rehab and weatherization. And so how do we cross-market amongst those, and how does that become a tool for wealth creation and wealth preservation there as well? We also haven't evaluated rehab and weatherization programs yet. So those are long-running programs for decades now as well. And so how do we evaluate those from a racial equity and a climate? A major tool in our kind of climate and sustainability work. And then something that Portia always hammers home, I think she reminds me daily, is how do we explore ways to provide connections to stewardship? So once someone's in a home, how do they treat that as an asset, and how do they stay in that home as well? And so how do we connect with our kind of nonprofit housing ecosystem around stewardship? So those are things that we're looking forward to working on there. And then continued collaboration with other jurisdictions to align. As we know, the City of St. Paul is exploring and has announced a large down payment assistance investment geography of the Rondo community, which is laid out in our ECI plan as well. But then I'm expecting them to do a kind of another infusion of cash into their general down payment assistance, which is through the housing. And then Portia and Carrie both participate in the Groundbreak Coalition along with and talks there around how can the private sector and all of the partners there kind of participate in down payment assistance, so being flexible around what that might look like too. And then Director Bessler is here today as we think about how can our tax forfeited properties become, as the idea that they have pitched forward, as productive properties. And so how can this down payment assistance align with those productive properties in homes like Margaret Street become a place for supply growth for home buyers. And that is our presentation.
Let's go back to the proposed changes to the down payment assistance program. And then I just want to maybe flesh out a little bit more here on the loan terms, especially if, helping create generational wealth. And, certainly that's what first generation home buyers is starting to, try to help with. We get down to those loan terms. At first blush, I'm thinking, so what does this look like if on first-time home buyers, 0% interest due upon sale unless sold to a child? So that way we could continue that, helping to create some wealth, generational wealth. And the same thing over on the other side. I wonder, having that, but it's forgivable after 20 years. But I wonder what happens, say, if mom and dad, first ones, buy it, but pass away at year 10, or how can we get the 20 with the kids taking on ownership if that passes on to them? Again, helping ensure that we're actually accomplishing our goal here of trying to, help create some generational wealth.
Great question.
Do we know it right now, what it would look like if mom and dad passed away in year 10? If the property, even if it stayed within the family, are we trying to recover because they didn't get to year 20 with the original loan folks?
We could write something in too, what we're doing, but the only issue is they still have a first mortgage, where somebody would have to qualify or be able to assume the first mortgage. So that would be, we could put something into our program that says that you're able to do that, but then there may be an issue with that.
Yep, I think we should drill down deeper here, how we can actually help support the passing on of wealth. You know, first blush, it's kids, but every family looks a little different too. You know, you can't open up the floodgates by any means, but you gotta be cognizant of what families look like and not exclude, you know, individuals that, you know, in this family are viewed as a son or a daughter. This family, they're viewed as sons and daughters, but maybe, you know, biologically, they're not sons and daughters, or they're cousins that are being raised as sons and daughters. I don't know, but I think it warrants paying a little more attention there and trying to be a little bit more deliberate.
Very language we can talk about on the front.
Yeah, that's huge, and thank you for that suggestion, Commissioner McDonough. You know, it's just, this must be the time when we go, wow, this is huge, right?
Yeah.
This has got to be that time, the change for the first time, but in particular, the first generation. It is just amazing that this is an opportunity for us with our own levy funds to add to the ability for wealth generation in this way. And I just want to ask for a redefinition of that first generation, because I think of so many families who have lost homes and for whom then generations of descendants have not had the ability to purchase homes, who would, to my mind, be first generation, but perhaps not strictly so according to a definition. Can you just refresh my mind on that definition?
One point I would add too in that thought process, Commissioner, is folks who have been foreclosed on are eligible after, for the existing program and would be continue to be eligible. And then I think more thought would need to be thought in about that wealth extraction piece. Maybe the wealth extraction happened long ago, and that gets into that self-attestation around that first generation home buying. How are we going to define that, and how are we going to kind of deal with that self-attestation and checking in on that?
I appreciate the thoughtfulness around that, because that's where a lot of poverty has occurred that would not have previously existed. And if we can look at that and thoughtfully build in how we consider that first generation, it would be helpful.
And then I really appreciate the minimum of 25% versus, you know, the requirement with the feds at 30, because they're forcing them to start out, you know, almost cost burden right there, you know. But do we have a maximum where we would just say you got to be in this window, or are we going to be flexible with each application and take a look at it? And in some ways, I'm not saying, you know, a maximum, just, you know, I look at my own. I mean, I didn't sleep for a month when I closed on my first house, which was $24,000. My monthly payment was $186. And I didn't sleep for a month because I didn't know I was going to make that payment. And within a couple of years, you know, salary, you know, because I was 21 years old, my life changed enough for that. $186 was hardly, you know, it was not an issue by any means. And I just wanted to make sure that we're helping people understand you too much is too much, but also recognizing, you know, in 3 years from now, too much might not be, but we don't want you to, you know, if we wait till this window, the house's value, everything goes up and you'll never get in, right? So how can we get you in, knowing at some point this is going to work well for you?
For sure. Could you touch on what the existing cap is with home funds, and like some of the thought process we've had around a cap in the proposed?
Yeah, I believe right now our cap is, well, the minimum is 30 and the top is 41. So back end, so your back end ratio.
And that's
so that's including,
that's all.
well, that's us right now.
Oh.
FHA, which I won't have any opinion on it, but FHA will go.
I think you just did.
They'll go, minimum is 30, but they'll go up for a back end ratio to 55. And that's what most people end up getting, is FHA, which I feel
That's
Yeah,
too much.
again, I won't say what I feel, but what I'm saying is that the 31 to 55, 55 just seems exorbitant. I've seen, you know, folks get into those situations where, as a counselor, I would say, okay, your net income is $3,000 a month, but you were approved for a FHA loan where your mortgage payment is $2,200 a month. Now, unless you have some phantom income I don't know about, I don't know how you're gonna sustain it for 30 years, but FHA said it was fine, the lenders wrote off on it, and they got it. So we want to let the first mortgage kind of take the precedent, but we also don't want to get to a point where we're seeing that somebody has a payment of this, because we also have that caveat that we don't want to really go over 25%. So that might keep somebody from saying, okay, maybe I don't need to borrow 372, maybe I should only borrow 295 to get this benefit of 25% down payment assistance. So I think we can adjust things to be able to get towards that, because we wouldn't allow.
I'll do a quick follow-up on that.
Quick follow-up.
I have a question, so it's different.
Okay, quick follow-up.
So, like the FHA piece and 55% is just scary. More scary than $186 when you're 1876. But if I understand how this works, FHA is typically a pretty small down payment, where if our money could actually buy that down, rather than actually help them get it. If they say they had their, 5% down payment, or they could get family help to get that, but our money would actually help them get from that 55% down to, say, like 35%. Is that something that we're thinking, or I'm probably getting too deep into the weeds here, but I just want to make sure if we're going to make these changes, and they're all good changes and they're all for the right reasons, we're trying to figure out that we're actually going to accomplish a goal of, especially on the first generational and the generational wealth creation.
Well, that's why I think engagement with the lender community is so
Right.
important, because then they could help the resident move into a more favorable mortgage rather than perhaps their traditional mortgage, or than a FHA or other type of subsidized mortgage as well. And so maybe they could be in a more traditional mortgage with the down payment assistance.
Thank you.
And I'll just say one thing, we do have this out to lenders. I've said, can you just give me a typical 80% AMI family of four making this, can you tell me how this would work for them? Are there any factors in this that clash against each other? Just so we know that, because there is a program in St. Louis Park that is pretty much like this in some ways. They have not written a loan, and this has been open for 9 months, because there are factors in the actual program that do not work with each other.
Ryan, and
Real quick.
go ahead. Okay.
I'm so glad that what you just stated, because my experience in the last 3 or 4 years with younger folks, let's say the 30s, 28, 29, is that they go for the 300 and what is it? 393, whatever. Their house score, and 2 years later, they lose the house. It's sort of self-defeating, and the money is given to them. So are we advising along the way with all of this?
Yes, we are, and one of the components that isn't on any of these slides, is that we are looking to, partner with some organizations that, cater towards African-American families, indigenous families, that do financial wellness. So that is part of the requirement, that you have to participate in this, to have that neutral third party that gives you the information, but also says, and they, have those real conversations with people saying, I know we've all been on Zillow and we've seen these beautiful houses, and everybody thinks, a lot of people who are first generation think, this is the only time I buy a house, when people have bought 4 or 5 houses, routinely in a normal, situation. So we are gonna have that financial wellness piece, so that people can see what makes sense for them. And they also will be required to speak with a homeownership advisor to figure out their specific situation. So we're not in a situation where, you borrow to the hilt, we give you $100,000, and then things go kaput in the next 4 or 5 years. We want to have all that.
house for in the meantime.
Exactly. We don't want that, and we also want to do the stewardship piece, so then that people can stay in their house.
Thank you.
Sure. You did well, hold on.
Okay.
Ryan, back. You're on it, Andrew.
Thanks.
Thanks, Madam Chair. To the I think there's a lot of strength. At the beginning of your presentation, you showed the growth of the CED team, but I want to give credit to how you've grown the team too. You can hear it even in this presentation that you carry different perspectives and levels of professional knowledge into this. Your work as a housing counselor, Portia, is really instrumental to having a different view on this than a policy view that Max is going to bring to it, or the practitioner at the city level and now county view that Carrie brings. And I like the way the team is built. I'm really impressed at how we've built that, and that's not what you see everywhere you go. So I wanted to add that. I was curious, like in your conversations, you mentioned the revolving conversations you're having with nonprofits as well as banks. And that feels like part of how you do avoid some of the questions that were coming up is like, they'd be the first in your ear saying like, this ain't gonna work and here's why. I'm hopeful that happens, but I was gonna ask, is there any chance for community banks to do anything to take what's here and further capitalize or go farther and do work that they do in their level that doesn't show up in here maybe, but like puts a program on steroids or something?
They can, and with the Groundbreak Coalition, I believe that we're doing that, and then working with, the new bank, First Independence Bank, and then also the CDFI, other CDFIs. And there are, as a housing council, I keep bringing that back, but it's pertinent, but, there's a list of like actual loans that are for folks that are first-time home buyers that have some things in it that kind of keep them from getting into those predatory lending type situations. So there are already banks, even the big ones, Wells Fargo, US Bank, Bremer, Bell, they have programs for folks. Sometimes they're for a specific geographical area and, how that goes, but they are thinking of that, and we are really having those conversations with them. So with the Groundbreak, it's me as a government, person, and then we have nonprofits, and we have actual private folks that we're really having these conversations and I think we've, pivoted already, because at first there were certain parameters that we were trying to hit, and now it's focused on Black residents. Like it went from, we have these three groups to this is the group we need to focus on. So,
And I'll just add too,
Yeah.
thank you, Ryan. Also the focus has shifted in terms of, we can throw all sorts of down payment assistance at individuals, but we may be setting them up for financial ruin. So financial wellness, as Portia stated, is as critical as the down payment assistance. Urban Institute had that great report, and they said down payment is wonderful in terms of pathways to supply, but we need to focus on sustaining homeownership, which is why the critical repair program is so critical as well, but also ensuring what does it mean to be a homeowner, so that should something occur or life changes happen, there's that little bit of cushion that's going to float them, so that we don't see the property on the PFL list, 5 years down the road.
Final follow, Madam Chair, on that. And then, thank you for letting me get through that. Joanne always gives me a hard time when I bring in like Japanese housing policy to our conversation, so I won't do that today, but I will bring in German housing policy there. So one of the ways in which Germany is, they're a renter-dominated group, right, which is different setup, but they've also successfully navigated like density development and population. So back to your earlier piece, one of the successful tools at the federal level that I wish existed here but doesn't is funding on a variety of sources gets allocated based on population percent changes over time and growth. And so you incentivize all of your municipalities to want to grow, because if they grow, you see better opportunities to access available resources. And we've talked many times with the Met Council, not actually creating disincentives to development across our communities. And I'm not even here to go there right now, but as you design those earlier programs, you think about corridors and opportunities and what does it look like, at some macro level, we should be thinking about the idea that like, if you are growing your community, which means more people have opportunities to live, and not at just the high end of the market, but like, we should take that into account at a policy level as we're thinking about those pieces of setting the foundation. Because at some point, you do have to choose where your next dollar in goes and figure out how to work with the right places. I just want to build the right incentives. So, thank you.
Yeah, so I'm gonna ask a question just layering on, because we've kind of all indicated, like, sometimes we get into a home and then we can't afford it. So, I love these down payment and first-time home buyer, but are we thinking about any ways to keep those first-time home buyers that might have already gotten in before this program existed, or have a life event and don't have, because they came in under home and they don't have any money in the bank to, respond? Are we thinking about any of that? Because I just know, having been like Jim, I think I was sleepless for much longer than a month. In my first home, and my mortgage was $2,000, and I probably made $3,000 a month. I mean, in reality, and so to think about, like, what does that look like?
I think, Max, you talked about the other programs that we have available and how we haven't really connected all of those. And I think that, on top of the fact that we have a couple of pilot programs that we, started with the CDBG CV fund, that we may continue to do. So I think that would also support and maybe bridge a gap for folks that stay in their houses and also help with repairs, so that you don't have to come out of your pocket with $6,000 to repair the water heater. We have a program for that where it's deferred and forgivable after 10 years.
And mortgage assistance.
And mortgage assistance.
So I think our two programs that we were able to pilot during CDBG, CV coronavirus, was the, mortgage assistance program through Minhawk, Minnesota Homeownership Center was our partner there. We were able to help 15 families with, were able to stay in their home.
That's paying their mortgage for a couple months.
Yeah,
Okay.
because they were behind.
Okay.
Yeah, to prevent foreclosure and eventually tax fraud. That program has ended, and we found that out of those 15 families, 14 families were families of color. And so that's a very direct, equity connection there as well. And the second program that we piloted with CDBG CV is the Critical Repair Grant. And so that's up to a $5,000 grant for either single-family homes or manufactured homes, in case you have that emergency. And you can't take on a $20,000 loan or a $10,000 loan, and add that to your debt pile. And so, this grant program, which is really just getting off the ground now, I think we have about 20 homes in the mix right now. We're working through that, for that emergency repair that might have that more peace of mind. So how do we connect everything together?
And there's one other piece that, you know, when we saw the mortgage foreclosure crisis in 08, 9, 10, you know, some people were able to go back and negotiate mortgages, and just even a $25,000 reduction in mortgage would drop their payment far enough, because they had some equity, but not enough to stay at that rate that they could save their houses. And so I would just encourage us to think about, you know, if a matter of $10,000 off your principal could actually be enough to keep people in forever, that we consider having a pot of money that does something like that too. That would save a tremendous amount of first-time homebuyers that got in too high and then had a life change.
On that note around foreclosure, out of this portfolio of 262 loans, 36 of them went into foreclosure. So some folks of our lending institutions said, hey, that's better than our portfolio. And some of those reasons was the percentage cap on the PITI, as well as these had to be fixed rate mortgages to utilize a down payment assistance, and that will continue. And so that allows a much more standardized process. And that connects back to what we talked about.
Yeah, we're prevalent.
But they still exist.
Yeah, they really
right?
do.
And especially as second mortgages that people get talked into, right?
Well, I have a couple of questions. When we talk about, first home purchase, I mean, because you can have a townhouse where you're purchasing it, or a condo where you're purchasing it. So the first question is, does that qualify here? It does, okay. Then my second question is, because I have family members that, even in single-family home developments and not brand-new ones, there's a homeowners association. And, you know, you have your mortgage payment, and you can handle that, but the homeowners association fee is pretty hefty in most cases, and you don't have a lot of control over it. And it goes up, and, you know, how does that play into your calculation on what someone can do? I mean, the homeowners association fees must be very difficult for you to plan for.
Well, thanks for that question. That should really say PITIMIA, because we're looking at principal, interest, taxes, insurance, mortgage insurance, and association dues. That's what we're looking at when we're looking at the payment. So we're still trying. And it's gonna be a little difficult to get all of that into 25%. But again, taxes go up, insurance can change depending on your credit. And of course, HOA dues, we encourage home buyers to look at the financial stability of their HOA, because I've had it where, you know, something happens and all of a sudden there's a $5 million assessment and everybody has to pay for it. And if it's 20 units, think about how much everybody has to pay.
Right.
So we do encourage, again, that financial wellness piece, and encourage the homeownership advisor to say, hey, guess what? If they do want to go into one of these, even if it's a single-family home with the HOA, make sure they look at the book, because they have the access to those and have somebody to help them with that. But yes, like I said, it should be more letters, but that would make it more
Well,
weird, so.
I guess, I was used to the idea of multifamily structure, for condominiums and townhouses to a certain extent to have an HOA, but I had not heard about it in single-family home developments. And apparently it's not uncommon.
Wow.
I don't know what they get for it, but.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, one internal conversation we've had, which, like, no more acronyms, but, and SL to that would be kind of the DREAM program, and that's student.
Oh,
And we certainly see, a lot of talk happening, in the, what's possible there, but when you think about the two pathways to creating wealth, includes education and homeownership. There's an inverse relationship, and so to the degree that we can try to, even think creatively about student loan debt, would allow for greater flexibility to be able to get into it. That's the 2.0.
Yeah.
We're working on that.
Yeah.
Love it.
No, that was all.
Oh, wow, all right. Let's see, I was trying to write everything down. First of all, I just want to echo, County Manager O'Connor's, kudos to the team. I mean, great team, it's great to have your personal experience, your Portia, and of course, Josh and Carrie. I'm curious about, I'm grateful that you want to build in the right incentives. I support County Manager O'Connor. I'm glad about sustainability, support all of these things. My two questions, just curious, I'm guessing based on our conversation, when you said St. Louis Park wasn't able to do this, I bet they don't have any houses that are at that rate. Aren't they all way over the amount?
Well,
Curious.
they're using I believe they're using not like a federal funding source, they're using their own funding source as well, but their issue is a lot. It's a different things in their program but one of the things is, it's very expensive to buy a house in St. Louis Park. And, yeah, they have a tiered program where certain AMIs get certain percentages and certain amounts, and it just does not, unless you're buying a condo, but then you got HOA dues,
Yeah.
it's not making a lot of sense.
I was just curious because I was thinking of some similarities in some of our communities, but they're pretty high. So, thank you. I just have a big picture question, and I'm just not remembering. So we've got an HRA levy that we have for all of our communities now. I mean, except for one, right? I mean, they all approved that. And so is that an automatic levy, or are we just could you just explain that whole thing to me? Because now we said this is a program just for the suburban first, because we're waiting for the city, but are we sort of holding half of the levy, for when St. Paul does enter in? And how are we allocating these dollars? Just
Thank you.
curious about the big picture.
Commissioner, Madam Chair. This has been the, logic game that we have been playing, for quite some time in terms of honoring the balance.
Yeah.
That we committed to,
Yeah.
when we authorized the HRA levy. And so, right now, in terms of year one, the city of St. Paul has an extraordinary pipeline in terms of multifamily. So when we're looking at $11 million of an HRA levy, which, roughly under $1 million is for kind of administrative staff, it's for IS, it's for X, we've got about $10 million to return to the community. So then you're looking at $5 million in the city of St. Paul, $5 million in suburban Ramsey. And we certainly have a huge share of affordable housing multifamily projects still need to get off the ground, and are able to take that $5 million for affordable housing projects. There is some still remaining where the city of St. Paul could put in for critical, put a request in for a critical corridor, and we're looking at more kind of opportunities to partner with supply, like on Margaret Street, which will take some of these dollars as well. But we're always working to kind of, if we fund this project, what does that do to the balance, particularly as it pertains to the HRA levy? keeping in mind, we also have the environmental response fund. We also have ARPA dollars. And so we're kind of balancing that as well. But there is a significant pipeline to ensure 30% AMI units are being, created within the city of St. Paul. And so we're kind of funneling those dollars there first.
Okay, and I'm just gonna, if county manager wants to comment, I mean, it's like other programs that we have, we're kind of, it may ebb and flow, but in, in the, over the years, it kind of balances out, that some years it'll be more skewed to the suburbs, some years it'll be more skewed to St. Paul, and I think we're okay with that as long as we understand that that's the ebb and flow.
Madam Chair, Commissioner McGuire, that's the way we committed to doing this with both the board here as well as in the conversations that led to support for, almost unanimous support for the HRA levy. And I think the data tracking, and that's why as we talk annually and we're here in front of the board, we can keep talking about that. We'll hold each other to account. The only thing I was gonna say, I just feel obligated to do it, is it might feel automatic, but the HRA levy, the regional rail levy, none of them are automatic if not approved by in December after being proposed by the county manager and going through a budget process.
There's some tails to that.
So I appreciate the way in which we feel because of the work, as though those are functionally automatic because you need to do them. But it does require us to think about if we're gonna stay at the statutory maximum, to propose a budget, to be approved by the board in December. And if that resolution's not there, there's no money. So, we're gonna, and as of now, like, this is a clear sign that we continue moving forward to plan to propose a budget that includes the HRA levy as a part of it per the statutory guidelines.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, this segues nicely actually into the next slide on accountability. So we have had quite a few questions from our city partners in terms of the extent of HRA levy spend and when they might get a report of sorts associated with particularly HRA levy. And so, the framing of the presentation today is demonstrating whether it be the addition of staff or the addition of programs that we are honoring the strategies and recommendations within the ECI plan. And so we continue to update twice a year the ECI plan tracker to show how we're kind of implementing those recommendations. Additionally, we plan to do an annual report the first quarter of next year that allows you to see what we've done through a variety of ways, whether it be through the plan, by source, programmatic area, or by the department. You can find an entry point into how we're performing through a variety of ways. And so if you're specific and honing in on the HRA levy, the annual report will talk about the extent of spend associated with the levy. If you're thinking about ARPA, then we'll point to you to the ARPA investments, and then we'll kind of aggregate that as well. So in terms of kind of programmatic area, we're working with communications and our open data staff to kind of build out the stories associated with our spend. And then lastly, the kind of foundational piece of this includes our performance measures. So we're tracking year after year how we're doing. In particular, one department-specific performance measure is on homeownership, and the percentage of recipients that are receiving down payment assistance by race. That we're being intentional, that we're evaluating our marketing strategy, our community partnerships, and we're getting the word out so that we don't have a home counselor that's saying, I didn't know he had a down payment assistance program, but everybody knows about our program and that they're helping to promote it as well. And so that's kind of the accountability kind of pieces or pillars that we commit to our city partners. And we hope to come back first quarter to this board in 23 to talk about the annual report and give you a breakdown of what it looks like. No pressure to our communications associate. Starting to piece that together.
We do have a couple more questions. I've got Commissioner Carter and Commissioner.
This is layers and layers deep. And it's wonderful to be able to see this approaching opportunity with our HRA, or with our levy. We are talking about down payment assistance, and we're also talking about making sure that people are able to stay in their homes and being mindful of that. I just want to add a comment, and that is about our affordable housing, our deeply affordable rental housing population, and the need to continue to grow where there is a whisper of a desire, an audience for home ownership. You know, we know the deep disparities that we have. Part of the layering, you know, for me also is about that suburban, urban, you know, divide, or not divide, but sharing.
No divide,
Yeah, we
right?
don't want the divide.
We don't wanna call it
The
that.
sharing of these funds, because we know that we have audience in our city, you know, in our main city in St. Paul. And we see the percentage of those funds in first home, or of those who took advantage of first home, being lower because the population is lower in the suburbs, with those communities of color. So how do we decide, you know, how do we configure our work such that we are able to continue to build that population, you know, and looking at those who are in deeply affordable housing as potential homeowners? You know, what do we offer in that space to make certain that we're continuing to develop that audience? And, you know, that's a question I have. You don't have to answer it right now unless you've got something right at the tip of your tongue. But I just want us to continue to be mindful that we have to continue to grow. They're not going to come to us necessarily, because they're not necessarily going to see the opportunity to be homeowners.
I'd love to just take a second. We have a service team level performance measure. Really setting our programs against community co-design. And to what degree have programs been co-designed with community versus created within the walls of, you know, courthouse here? And, you know, I really think that that's an important piece of it, because we have this wonderful plan and we have, you know, our idea of what the program should look like, but we do need to go back and ensure that we are partnering with community on the implementation of these programs and of these funds to ensure that we're not just recreating inequities throughout the programs as well. And, you know, we're going to be held accountable to that through service team performance. We unpack this, and we've started to have wonderful conversations with various community groups who are saying, it can't go like this. You've got to bring us in earlier. You've got to, you know, not come to us with a solution, but come co-create with us. And so it's going to take some time, but we know that will result in better outcomes.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Nice plug for the performance measure.
Star for that, go star.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. So, Joe made her comments about kind of the split balance. Originally, when I raised my hand a while back, I was gonna just address, because when you let out with this, that you said you were home, had to be in the suburbs, because St. Paul gets your home. Now with the levy, we could go both ways. But you couched it under the term that you were gonna wait to see how a couple of the St. Paul programs developed, helping support folks before we started moving into the St. Paul arena. But then, you know, when you were talking with Mary Jo and her response, it was more about, you know, the kind of the 50-50, St. Paul's like subscribed or maybe oversubscribed on the deeply affordable multifamily housing. And here's where I'm gonna raise the equity issue, right? We cannot have our money continuing to build deeply affordable 30% multifamily in the city of St. Paul. And then this same money go into the suburban community and build 80% generational wealth with homeownership.
Right.
And in some ways, it's almost flipped. If we're gonna try to drive policy, we need the suburban communities to understand and accept that they're a part of the 30% AMI solution, and they need to be a part of that. And we've got whole swaths of neighborhoods in St. Paul, east side BN1, that was in home ownership and now is almost all in rental. And we need to start transitioning back into home ownership and providing those opportunities. But if we just use the geographic split, we can continue to drive the inequities between the suburban and the city communities even deeper with our money. If we're only gonna say, we'll do the 30% multifamily in the city, and we're gonna do 80% home ownership generational wealth in the suburbs. Because then I will vote to get rid of it.
No, and Commissioner, that's absolutely, obviously not our intent.
But that's the way it's set up right now.
Well, I think we have opportunities for wealth creation through Market Street. We have opportunities, for, this kind of scattered site housing through various community partnerships that we're, and we have opportunities like Payne and Maryland. And so we're looking at doing both. I think right now we have such, coming out of the solicitation for inclusive housing development, solicitation kind of maximize those projects and move forward. But the goal moving forward is to really provide county-wide programs through the HRA levy. And so.
Yeah.
McDonough, may I?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
So as we think about the 21 projects that we funded through our multifamily solicitations in 2020, the majority of those funds, and I just switched to the next slide because it's kind of answered within that as well. So 740 new units. The 3 buildings that we've closed on in June so far, that include 30% AMI and other AMI levels, are Lauderdale, Moundsview, and Little Canada. And so when we're talking about this investment down payment assistance, if we look at the May 17th board action, we're talking $822,000 earmarked for 2022 for this down payment assistance program to test it out, whereas this is in the dozens of millions of dollars. Lower, and this I think connects to Commissioner Carter talking about the housing continuum and what is our strategy for down the AMI level and how do we connect that lower AMI level into these homeownership.
That's still, and I appreciate that, but a couple things. One is, I was willing to have a little patience when you teed it up that you were kind of waiting for St. Paul to make some decisions on their financial. I'm not willing to have patience if it's totally based on you're gonna fund, they've got enough 30% multifamily projects that 50% is going that way on this, and they are left out of the home ownership piece. That is just not acceptable. And then also, we gotta, certainly the partnership piece here and being responsive, but is the tail wagging the dog here? Because part of this is we're trying to drive policy change from, generations of how we've invested in this community, where we place people in this community, and how we've kept certain people and certain populations in part of this community. And if we're not pushing the change, but responding to the way things are, we'll continue to drive it even deeper with our money. And that's not even helpful.
Commissioner McDonough, I think this is a great segue into our technical assistance for emerging developers and our plan to do a solicitation that targets what we reference missing middle or small scale developers to ensure that we're building wealth on the pipeline of developers as well.
So one of the things we saw in this 2022 spring-winter solicitation was a gap in our process and that was available for emerging developers to build these types of units that could be owner-occupied within the city of St. Paul. Multiple applications came in that were just either not ready to fund or missing materials because of that, either barriers because of our application process or the ability to harness technical assistance. So one, needing kind of a technical assistance program that's aligned with our partners, their work around mentoring, coaching, and learning about the development process for new developers. And those are primarily developers of color in the city of St. Paul. And many of those units that they are proposing are owner-occupied units. And this would then kind of culminate in a 2023 solicitation that's focused on those developers and include rental throughout the county, and many of those proposals, as we know, will be.
Could you give me an example where they're suggesting home ownership? Because, when you guys presented this to me as HRA chair, and I think we even talked about this, I seen this more of helping to support JB Vang's development on East 7th, right? Where, it's 30% AMI, 3 bedrooms, ground floor acts, separate entrances, maybe even an exercise room and amenities that traditionally weren't part of it. But we didn't talk that there was an ownership component. I'm not aware of any emerging developers that are actually talking about a you know, ownership type development, at least on the east side. Do you have some examples where that is potentially occurring?
Without naming names or property addresses? Yes, I've recently, within the last month, Carrie and I have had 2 discussions with different developers of color who are interested and are proposing owner-occupied units within the east side. Some of them are interested in partnering with some of the kind of landowning institutions along kind of the east side of Phelan Boulevard area. And then the other one already owns residential lots both on the east side and in the Midway neighborhood.
Right. I just need to make Madam Chair, I just need to make sure that, I mean, 1 or 2 here and there is not good enough.
I just want to echo what Jim is saying, because I am also concerned. I really appreciate the effort that St. Paul has recently proposed around the descendants of displaced Rondo residents and homeownership opportunities. But I'm a little concerned that we only put our money in that bucket. I'm thinking of so many renters who have lived their whole lives in Hamlin Midway or in Frogtown that maybe aren't the Rondo descendants, but now need homeownership assistance. And we're saying, well, you have to move to the suburbs then if you're going to do that. And so, to me, as a county, we have often said, we're going to fill a gap that someone else isn't filling. So I just want us to keep that as like, it's fantastic what St. Paul's doing, fully support it, but there are other gaps that maybe we play as a role, and that goes to the east side, that goes down to the west side, and other areas as well, to make sure that other communities also have that opportunity for homeownership in the city of St. Paul. So just want to echo what Jim is saying.
Madam Chair, Commissioners Castillo and McDonough, I hear you. I don't disagree at all on the idea we got to get this program into St. Paul in an aligned way and homeowner, like, no, I'm not even gonna, I'll just say, I'll let it stand. I think the reality of the mayor's budget address and the timing of it makes it tricky, and even running through to where we end up today, we don't exactly know what gets proposed till it gets proposed. I think we need to follow up with some very intentional and strategic conversations here of alignment, because the other part is, history suggests if we don't do that alignment part right, it delays and goes badly, and then nobody wins, and we end up exactly where you said, which is 1 or 2 units, and we're 5 years later and arguing. But we're also at the right spot where there's no reason that needs to happen. We just need to think through here how to engage directly with both staff and their HRA. So that's a follow-up that I'm hearing loud and clear, and would love to be a part of that.
Okay, so when we passed the HRA levy, we said, you know, it was going to be split, and to the extent that we could, because there's never a perfect slip or thing there. So, I guess I'm confused about why there is this big concern about it not being in St. Paul. I mean, one of the reasons that the suburbs wanted that was because St. Paul could suck it all up, and one of the reasons is St. Paul wanted it was because they have a greater need and are putting more money in themselves, which both make sense. So that's how come it kind of worked for both. But is it just because this particular program is not part of that, or how are we balancing this? Because again, I think both sides have a legitimate reason to want to make sure that that the constituents are covered. So can you help me out a little bit?
Madam Chair, or Commissioner.
Did I miss?
I think Commissioner McDonough's concern is that this program is targeted towards the suburbs.
Deeper than that.
Well,
This is an 80% AMI program for the most part, and everything that's being funded at St. Paul is a 30% AMI program. We need both. Well, if we're good, there is balance in ensuring that we are putting 80% AMI programs in St. Paul, and we are driving 30% AMI programs in the suburbs. That's kind of it in a nutshell right now.
Madam Chair, Commissioner, I think to your question, Commissioner Reinhardt, is that split is what it is, it's 5 and 5, and, you know, some years might go like this, but the goal is that we keep tracking our investments against that commitment. I think, Commissioner McDonough, what you're trying to say is, of the St. Paul contribution, that we are balancing that $5 million across deeply affordable housing infrastructure in terms of rental, and also wealth creation opportunities, so that each, you know, whether it's suburban Ramsey County or the city of St. Paul, are each benefiting from an equitable share or ratio of supply. And that is our intent as well.
Okay.
Commissioner Carter.
And I was just going to add that that's truly a need, because otherwise, from an equity perspective, we are not offering the opportunity for home ownership to that population that is most available, which is going to be within the city of St. Paul. And that doesn't, right now, that doesn't mean it'll always be that way, but that's what we see, and if we're going to drive equity, we have to be sure that balance exists as well.
I do have one other question. Again, I know that we've covered this, but I can't remember. Because since we now have a countywide HRA, does that mean that some of the funds that used to come to us in the county that could only be used in the suburbs, that's gone away? Okay, so some of these funds have different rules depending on who's administering them. So the 11, I think it was 11 million is the new stuff, and that is for both. Okay, I wasn't sure if when we did that HRA levy, if it combined everything else too. So there are some things that can only happen in St. Paul and some things that can only happen in the suburbs.
Commissioner, so when we did, for example, the first inclusive housing development solicitation, it included a variety of funds, home funding, which is geographically restricted to the suburbs, but it also included HRA levy funding.
Okay.
And ARPA funds, and ERF. And so it was just kind of a come one, come all, CDBG, yes, GO bonds.
Which was a great way to do it, by the way.
And so we are absolutely, when we worked with the Center for Economic Inclusion, they said, don't just create easily affordable supply, also create wealth building opportunities. And that's absolutely our intent in terms of driving 30% AMI units and balancing that with opportunities, pathways to ownership, not just for residential ownership, but commercial pathways as well.
I just want to, we're approaching the end of the time. I want to acknowledge once again that this CED had 4 staff when I joined the county, and now you're at 14, and all of a sudden you've got this infusion of cash, and it's going to take time. And I want to acknowledge the full spectrum of work that you've talked to us today about, especially, I don't want to lose sight of those critical corridors. There are many places throughout the suburbs where it'd be very hard to live if you were making 30% AMI, because you must have a car to survive. So investing in those critical corridors is going to build the capacity to make it easier for our suburban cities to build up that 30% AMI housing there, because there is access to that housing and jobs throughout the corridors that doesn't exist right now. And I think at the same time, as we continue to build and establish relationships with our suburban communities, it's a challenge. You know, Shoreview right now is pushing forward with their inclusive housing plan, and it is an uphill battle for them, and they are really soldiering on, and they are kind of the leader in sort of the suburban communities. And until we get the opportunity to build trust on what does affordable housing mean, what does it mean to bring this to our communities, we can't force them to pass a resolution in favor of funding at 30% AMI. And if building trust means responding to their requests in terms of, we need to build up these corridors to actually get transit to make this feasible, we want homeownership opportunities, helps us build those relationships to move them towards and down the spectrum of options available. This is a brand new program. We are just spending this money that we are leveraging our HRA funds. And while we want that goal to be a full spectrum of affordability across the entire county, I want to say that I recognize that what you've done just thus far in this short amount of time with a brand new team is fantastic. And I'm really excited about it and the opportunities it opens up, and that we want to be intentional and thoughtful about how we can get the biggest bang for our buck as we're immediately spending, and to invest in our future, to build that infrastructure for the future, and to build relationships with our local partners at the same time. And then I can give it to Carrie or Joanna to wrap up.
Thank you for all of the range of feedback today. We'll bring this back and retool and tinker, and then we ask that you all, when we do, post these programs, just push it out through your networks, your, partnerships and your relationships so that we can use with these programs.
Thank you. Great job. Thank you. Thank you.